For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had stood as the ultimate authority in the galaxy. Made up of the most powerful and advanced species, they had brought order to the stars, creating a long-standing peace through strict rules, treaties, and agreements. Wars had become relics of the past, remembered only in history books, and the galaxy thrived under this era of stability. The Council saw themselves as the protectors of this peace, the guardians of balance, ensuring that no single species disrupted the harmony they had painstakingly built. Humanity, a relatively new arrival on the galactic stage, had been granted membership in the Council a few centuries ago. At first, they were seen as a promising species, innovative, driven, and adaptable. Humans had integrated themselves into the galactic community quickly, eager to prove themselves and contribute to the shared goals of the Council. But as the centuries passed, something changed. Humanity's ambition, once admired, began to concern the older species of the Council. Humans, unlike most of the galaxy's inhabitants, didn't seem content with the status quo. They expanded rapidly, colonizing new worlds, pushing the boundaries of technology, and challenging the long-established norms that had kept the Council's peace intact. While the other species were satisfied with maintaining the balance, humanity sought more. They developed new technologies, explored forbidden regions of space, and ventured into areas that the Council had long deemed off-limits. Their progress, though remarkable, was seen as reckless by the Council. Over time, the Council began to view humanity as a potential threat to the stability they had maintained for so long. The humans had an insatiable hunger for growth, and with each passing decade, they pushed the limits of what was acceptable under Council law. Diplomatic warnings were issued, but humanity always seemed to find a way to skirt the regulations, exploiting loopholes and advancing their interests in ways that left the Council uneasy. The final straw came when humanity began developing a new form of technology, something the Council had forbidden for centuries. It was a revolutionary energy source, one that could potentially grant them immense power, far beyond what any species had ever achieved. The Council's intelligence networks had caught wind of the project, and the moment they confirmed it, alarms went off across the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, the Council convened an emergency meeting. The elder species, who had been responsible for shaping the galactic peace, were divided on how to respond. Some argued that humanity's progress was inevitable and that the Council should adapt to this new reality. Others, however, viewed humanity as a ticking time bomb, one that could unravel the entire galaxy if not stopped. The debates raged for days. The more conservative voices within the Council called for immediate action, while others insisted that diplomacy could still resolve the issue. But as the evidence of humanity's technological advancements mounted, the tide began to turn. The Council could no longer ignore the reality. Humanity had become a force that threatened the delicate balance they had maintained for so long. In a historic decision, the Council voted to break the 3,000-year peace and declare war on humanity. It was an unprecedented move. The galaxy had known no conflict of this scale in millennia, and the shockwaves of the decision rippled across every system. The declaration was clear. Humanity had crossed a line, and the Council would not allow them to continue unchecked. The long-standing peace was over. The news reached Earth swiftly, and with it, a sense of disbelief. For centuries, humanity had operated under the assumption that they were part of the greater galactic community, trusted members of the Council. Now, they found themselves the target of the very organization they had once considered an ally. The announcement of war was met with confusion, anger, and, above all, a deep sense of betrayal. Humanity's leaders gathered, trying to make sense of the situation. They had known their rapid advancement might draw attention, but they had never expected the Council to respond with such hostility. Still, as the dust settled, it became clear that there was no turning back. The Galactic Council had made its decision, and humanity would now have to face the full force of its combined military might. But surrender was never an option. Humanity, despite being outnumbered and facing overwhelming odds, was not without its own strengths. Earth's leadership knew that while the Council's forces were vast, they were also slow, burdened by centuries of peace and tradition. The older species of the galaxy had grown complacent, comfortable in their belief that their authority would never be challenged. Humanity, on the other hand, had spent its entire history fighting, adapting, and overcoming impossible odds. War was something they understood deeply. In response to the Council's declaration, humanity mobilized. There were no illusions about the scale of the threat they faced. The Council's forces were immense, their technology unmatched, and their combined fleets outnumbered humanity's many times over. But humanity had always thrived when pushed to the brink. The survival instinct that had driven them for millennia was now fully activated. Earth's leadership issued a statement to the galaxy, one that echoed with defiance and determination. Humanity had no desire for war, but they would not stand by while their existence was threatened. They had worked too hard to build their place in the galaxy, and they would not allow anyone to take it from them. The message was simple. If the Council wanted a war, humanity would fight, but they would not fight on the Council's terms. Preparations for defense began immediately. The human military, though smaller than the Council's forces, was agile and adaptable. They had spent decades studying the Council's fleets, analyzing their weaknesses, and preparing for the possibility of conflict. Now, all of that preparation would be put to the test. Human engineers worked around the clock, developing new weapons and defensive systems designed to counter the Council's overwhelming power. Every ship, every soldier, every resource was mobilized in preparation for what was to come. Humanity knew that they couldn't win through brute force alone. They would have to be smarter, more strategic, and willing to use every advantage they had. Across Earth and the human colonies, a sense of unity took hold. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for humanity's place in the galaxy. For too long, they had been viewed as outsiders, a species that didn't quite fit into the established order. Now, they had a chance to prove themselves, to show the galaxy that humanity was more than just an upstart race. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they would not go quietly. As the Council's fleets began to mobilize, the galaxy braced for a conflict the likes of which hadn't been seen in millennia. The 3,000-year peace was broken, and the stage was set for a war that would reshape the future of the galaxy forever. The declaration of war from the Galactic Council sent shockwaves through humanity. For years, Earth had been a member of the Council, contributing to its progress while navigating its complex web of rules and politics. But now, they faced something entirely different, an existential threat from the very organization they had once respected. As the Council's war machine began to stir, humanity's leaders knew they had little time to act. The Council's forces were massive, spanning across star systems with a military that had long been considered unbeatable. The fleets of the elder races were unparalleled in scale, and their technology was the result of millennia of refinement. The Council's military doctrines were rooted in precise, calculated warfare, designed to overwhelm any opposition before it could even form a response. Humanity, by comparison, was a fraction of their size, and Earth's leaders were well aware of the overwhelming force heading their way. But if there was one thing humanity had always excelled at, it was survival. Faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, humans had a long history of turning impossible situations into victories. Their leaders understood that this war couldn't be won by traditional means. There would be no head-on confrontation with the Council's vast fleets. Instead, humanity would have to fight smarter, using every ounce of their ingenuity, adaptability, and unconventional thinking to stay alive. As the Council prepared its fleets for deployment, humanity began a different kind of preparation. The first step was to rally their people. Earth's leadership broadcast a message to every colony, every outpost, every citizen. The message was clear. This was not a fight they had asked for, but it was a fight they would not back down from. The Council may have declared war, but humanity would decide how it would be fought. Across the human colonies, the response was immediate. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, and civilians alike understood the stakes. This wasn't just a war for territory or resources. This was a war for survival. The Council had made its intentions clear. They viewed humanity's growth as a threat to the balance of power, and they intended to crush it before it could rise any further. But humanity wasn't about to be crushed. They had learned from centuries of conflict that brute force alone didn't win wars. The Council's fleets might be vast and powerful, but they were also rigid, designed for large-scale engagements against enemies who fought the same way. Humanity, however, had never fought according to anyone else's rules. Their entire military philosophy was built around flexibility, innovation, and adaptation. In the weeks following the Council's declaration, humanity began to prepare in earnest. Across Earth's military installations, teams worked around the clock to upgrade their defensive capabilities. They couldn't match the Council's ship for ship, but they could create new technologies that would give them an edge where it mattered most. Human engineers developed advanced countermeasures, electronic warfare systems, and stealth technologies designed to neutralize the Council's superior firepower. One of humanity's greatest assets was its ability to learn and adapt quickly. Over the years, human scientists had studied the Council's technology, not just to catch up, but to understand its vulnerabilities. They had discovered that while the Council's ships were powerful, they relied heavily on centralized systems and predictable strategies. Humanity's response was to design systems that could disrupt those advantages. They created ships capable of jamming the Council's communications, weapons that could bypass traditional shields, and tactics that emphasized speed and unpredictability over raw firepower. At the heart of humanity's defense strategy was the understanding that they couldn't win by meeting the Council head-on. Instead, they would use hit-and-run tactics, asymmetrical warfare, and psychological operations to wear the Council down. They would make the Council fight on their terms, in battles that exploited the Council's overconfidence and lack of adaptability. While the Council prepared for a traditional war, humanity prepared for a different kind of conflict. They didn't intend to fight one massive battle. Instead, they planned to stretch the war out, forcing the Council into a series of skirmishes and ambushes that would chip away at their forces. The Council might have overwhelming numbers, but humanity would make every loss count. Earth's colonies, spread across multiple systems, were fortified in ways the Council hadn't anticipated. Many of the human outposts were small, isolated, and not seen as strategic targets, but these were precisely the places where humanity's strength lay. Rather than focusing all their defenses on a few key locations, humanity decentralized their forces. They turned every colony, every space station, and every hidden installation into a potential battlefield. The Council, with its centralized command structure, couldn't fathom the idea of fighting on so many fronts at once. They were used to large-scale engagements, where victory was achieved through overwhelming numbers and superior firepower. But humanity had no intention of giving them that kind of battle. Instead, they would force the Council to fight a war of attrition, stretching their supply lines, exhausting their resources, and creating confusion at every turn. Humanity also understood the psychological aspect of war. The Council had enjoyed 3,000 years of peace, and many of its member species had forgotten what real conflict looked like. Humanity, on the other hand, had never known such luxury. Their history was one of constant struggle, against themselves, against nature, and now against the Council. They knew how to handle fear, uncertainty, and the chaos of war. The Council didn't. In the days leading up to the first skirmishes, Earth's leadership prepared a series of strategic moves designed to throw the Council off balance. They planted false intelligence, leaked misleading information, and staged mock troop movements that made it difficult for the Council to predict where the first engagement would take place. Humanity understood that the Council's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness, its reliance on order and predictability. When the Council's fleets finally launched their first offensive, they expected to face a coordinated defense. What they encountered instead was confusion. Human forces struck at seemingly random targets, launching surprise attacks in isolated systems while retreating from others before the Council could react. The Council's commanders, and used to this kind of warfare, found themselves constantly outmaneuvered. They had come expecting a single decisive battle, but humanity was fighting a war of 1,000 cuts. As the first wave of Council ships entered human space, they were met with resistance that defied their expectations. Small, agile human ships darted in and out of their formations, using the cover of asteroid fields and nebulae to launch quick, devastating strikes. Human engineers had equipped these ships with cloaking devices, making it nearly impossible for the Council to track their movements. The Council, used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers, found themselves chasing ghosts. Every time they thought they had trapped the human fleet, it would slip away, leaving behind wreckage and chaos. Frustration grew among the Council's commanders as they realized that humanity wasn't playing by the rules they had set. As the weeks wore on, the Council's forces found themselves stretched thin. They had expected a quick victory, but instead, they were being drawn into a protracted conflict. Humanity had taken the Council's greatest strength, its size, and turned it into a liability. The Council's fleets were too slow, too cumbersome to keep up with the human hit-and-run tactics. For humanity, the war had only just begun. They knew that they couldn't win through brute force alone, but they didn't need to. Their goal was survival, and they were proving that they could outlast the Council through sheer will, ingenuity, and determination. The Council had declared war, but they were quickly discovering that humanity was far more formidable than they had ever imagined. The first engagements between humanity and the Galactic Council had not gone as the Council had expected. What should have been a swift and decisive blow to Earth's forces had instead turned into a frustrating series of skirmishes that left the Council reeling. Every time they launched a major offensive, they found themselves outmaneuvered by the humans, who seemed to vanish into space as quickly as they had appeared. The Council, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers and technology, was facing something they hadn't anticipated, a species that refused to fight by the rules. In the weeks following their initial failed offensives, the Council's frustration grew. They had never encountered an enemy like humanity before, one that was so unpredictable, so adaptive, and so willing to embrace unconventional tactics. Council fleets that were supposed to sweep through human territory unchallenged now found themselves bogged down in ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. Supply lines were harassed constantly, and communication between the fleets became increasingly difficult as human cyber attacks disrupted the Council's vast, interconnected networks. To make matters worse, the Council was discovering that humanity wasn't just fighting defensively. They had begun to launch their own offensives, striking deep into Council territory. Human forces, using stealth ships and advanced cloaking technology, began hitting key infrastructure points, supply depots, communication hubs, and even shipyards where the Council's new warships were being built. Each strike was precise, leaving the Council scrambling to respond, always a step behind. These attacks sent a clear message to the Council. Humanity wasn't going to sit back and wait for the next assault. They were taking the fight to their enemies, and they were doing so on their own terms. The Council's commanders, once confident in their overwhelming superiority, now found themselves second-guessing every move. How could a species so new to the galactic stage be causing so much damage? How had they underestimated humanity so badly? The answer lay in humanity's history. For centuries, humans had fought wars on their own planet, wars that spanned continents and lasted for decades. They had learned to fight with whatever they had, to adapt to every situation, and to make the most out of seemingly impossible odds. Earth's military leaders had studied their own history well, and they were applying those hard-learned lessons to the current conflict. While the Council relied on massive fleets and traditional military tactics, humanity's forces were smaller, more agile, and far more flexible. Human commanders had no interest in fighting the kind of battles the Council was prepared for. Instead, they focused on what they did best: improvisation and asymmetrical warfare. They exploited every weakness in the Council's strategies, refusing to engage in a direct confrontation unless it was absolutely necessary. One of humanity's greatest strengths was their ability to strike unexpectedly. The Council, used to large, set-piece battles, struggled to deal with an enemy that seemed to attack from every angle. Human ships appeared out of nowhere, striking quickly and then vanishing before the Council could mount a proper defense. They disrupted supply chains, cut off reinforcements, and attacked critical targets that were never supposed to be vulnerable. This kind of warfare began to take its toll on the Council. Their fleets, spread across vast distances, were slow to react, and their chain of command, designed for more structured warfare, couldn't keep up with the fluid nature of the conflict. What had started as a war of overwhelming force was now turning into a war of attrition, and the Council wasn't prepared for it. For every human ship they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, harassing their forces and keeping them constantly on edge. The human colonies, spread out across multiple systems, became strongholds of resistance. Each colony had been fortified to withstand a siege, and the Council's forces found it nearly impossible to break through. Even when they managed to land troops on a colony, the humans fought back with a level of ferocity and coordination that caught the invaders off guard. Underground bunkers, hidden weapons caches, and intricate defensive systems made every battle a nightmare for the Council's ground forces. The longer the war dragged on, the more the Council realized that they were losing control. Humanity wasn't playing by the same rules, and the Council's traditional methods were proving ineffective. In their arrogance, they had assumed that they could crush Earth quickly and easily, but now they were beginning to understand just how dangerous an adaptable enemy could be. The Council's internal politics began to fray as well. Some of the member species, particularly the younger ones, questioned the wisdom of continuing the war. They had never wanted conflict with humanity in the first place and had been dragged into the war by the older, more conservative factions within the Council. Now, with losses mounting and no clear path to victory, the divisions within the Council grew deeper. As frustration mounted, the Council turned to more drastic measures. They began deploying their most advanced and destructive weapons, hoping to force humanity into submission through sheer terror. Massive warships, equipped with planet-destroying technology, were sent into human space with orders to bombard colonies that refused to surrender. The Council hoped that such overwhelming displays of power would break humanity's resolve. But humanity was not so easily cowed. They had faced destruction before, on their own world, during their own wars, and they knew how to survive in the face of overwhelming odds. Instead of retreating, human forces launched daring raids on the Council's most powerful warships. Using cloaked ships and guerrilla tactics, they disabled the Council's superweapons before they could be deployed, leaving the Council's commanders furious and humiliated. The psychological toll on the Council's forces was immense. The once invincible fleets of the galaxy's oldest civilizations were now being outmaneuvered and outsmarted by a species they had considered inferior. The Council soldiers, who had expected a quick victory, now found themselves locked in a war that had no end in sight. Morale plummeted as reports of human victories and daring raids spread throughout the ranks. Humanity, on the other hand, grew stronger with each passing day. Their success in the war began to rally more support from within their own colonies, as well as from sympathetic factions within the Council itself. Some of the younger species, impressed by humanity's resilience and adaptability, quietly began offering covert support, providing intelligence and resources that helped bolster Earth's efforts. The Council, once united in its decision to crush humanity, was now deeply divided. Some member species called for peace, fearing that the war would ultimately lead to the Council's collapse. Others, more prideful and stubborn, insisted that the war must continue until humanity was brought to its knees. But even those voices were growing quieter as the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. For the first time in millennia, the Galactic Council was on the defensive. Their fleets, once the symbol of their absolute authority, were struggling to maintain control over a war they had started. And all the while, humanity continued to fight, fiercely, intelligently, and with a determination that left the Council in disarray. Humanity's message to the galaxy was clear: they would not be broken. The Council had declared war on them, but now they were realizing just how costly that decision would be. What had once been a simple plan to reassert control had turned into a nightmare, and the Council's worst fears were beginning to come true. They had unleashed a force they couldn't control, and now the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting. The tide of the war had shifted, and the Galactic Council, once so confident in its ability to crush humanity, now faced the grim reality that they were losing control. The Council's fleets, designed for overwhelming power and brute force, had been drawn into a war they didn't understand. Humanity had transformed the conflict from a straightforward conquest into a war of attrition, and the Council was ill-equipped to deal with the consequences. As the war dragged on, the cracks within the Council began to widen. The elder species, those who had pushed hardest for war, were now under intense pressure to justify the mounting losses. What had started as a decision to contain humanity had spiraled into a full-scale conflict that was draining resources, morale, and political unity. The Council, once the supreme authority in the galaxy, was now faltering. Within the Council chambers, debate raged. The more progressive factions, who had originally opposed the war, argued that continuing the conflict was pointless. They pointed to humanity's growing success in the war and the heavy toll it was taking on the Council's fleets. Each failed offensive, each colony that fell to human raids, was a reminder that this was not a war the Council could win through sheer numbers alone. But the more conservative factions refused to back down. They believed that ending the war now would set a dangerous precedent, one that would show the rest of the galaxy that the Council could be defied. To them, humanity was still a threat to the established order, and surrendering, even indirectly, was unacceptable. But with each passing week, their voices grew more strained, their arguments less convincing. The reality was that humanity had outmaneuvered the Council at every turn. Their decentralized military strategy, combined with their ability to innovate on the fly, had turned the Council's size and power into liabilities. The massive fleets that were supposed to guarantee victory were now bogged down, unable to respond quickly enough to human attacks that seemed to come from nowhere. The Council's greatest strength, its vast, interconnected military machine, had become its greatest weakness. Humanity, meanwhile, had only grown stronger. Each victory against the Council, each successful raid on their supply lines, had bolstered their resolve. The human colonies, once seen as isolated and vulnerable, had become strongholds of resistance. Earth's leaders, who had originally viewed the war as a desperate fight for survival, now began to see the conflict as an opportunity. Humanity wasn't just defending itself anymore, it was asserting itself as a major power in the galaxy. The Council had underestimated humanity from the beginning. They had assumed that their technological superiority and centuries of peace would be enough to cow the human race into submission. But they had forgotten a crucial element of warfare, the will to fight. Humanity's will was unbreakable, forged by centuries of struggle, conflict, and survival. Earth had known countless wars before joining the galactic stage, and now they were using that experience to full effect. In the outer systems, where the Council had once dominated, human forces launched a series of bold offensives. They targeted key Council facilities, shipyards, and strategic outposts, crippling the Council's ability to mount a coordinated defense. Each attack was carefully planned, striking at the heart of the Council's logistical network. Human fleets, using stealth technology and guerrilla tactics, appeared where they were least expected, devastating entire sectors before disappearing into the vastness of space. The Council, struggling to keep up, began to retreat from many of its outer territories, consolidating its forces in a desperate bid to protect its core systems. But the damage had already been done. The Council's authority, once unquestioned, had been severely weakened. Other species, watching from the sidelines, began to question whether the Council was truly as invincible as it claimed to be. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had exposed the Council's vulnerability for all to see. Even within the Council itself, dissent was growing. Some member species began to quietly negotiate with human leaders, seeking to distance themselves from the war and avoid further conflict. They recognized that humanity was not going to be easily defeated, and that continuing to fight only served to weaken the Council as a whole. These species, more pragmatic and forward-thinking, saw an opportunity to align themselves with humanity's rise, rather than resist it. Earth's leadership, aware of the shifting dynamics within the Council, seized the moment. They sent out diplomatic feelers, offering peace talks to any Council species willing to step away from the war. The message was simple. Humanity did not seek to conquer, but they would defend themselves fiercely. The Council had declared war on them, but humanity was offering a way out for those wise enough to take it. Slowly, species by species, the Council's coalition began to fracture. Some species withdrew from the war entirely, unwilling to continue pouring resources into a conflict that was clearly unwinnable. Others openly defied the Council's directives, refusing to send more troops or ships into the fight. The Council's once unified front was crumbling, and with it, their ability to maintain control over the galaxy. In a final, desperate move, the Council's leaders convened to discuss one last major offensive, a plan to deliver a decisive blow to humanity that would finally bring them to their knees. The Council still held the advantage in sheer numbers and technology, and they believed that with the right strategy, they could turn the tide. But even as they made their plans, they knew the war was slipping out of their grasp. The offensive was launched with great fanfare, a final show of force meant to remind the galaxy who truly held power. But humanity was ready. The human fleet, now bolstered by years of experience and technological advancements, met the Council head-on in a decisive battle near a contested colony world. The Council ships, massive and slow, were overwhelmed by human tactics that exploited their weaknesses at every turn. Human ships darted through the Council's formations, using superior agility and advanced weaponry to dismantle the fleet piece by piece. The battle, though hard-fought, ended in yet another humiliating defeat for the Council. Their last hope of victory had been dashed, and with it, their dreams of reasserting control over the galaxy.